Hello and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I'm Kate Willett.
I'm Emil Torres.
And today we have such an interesting episode for you. We talked to journalist Eoin Higgins, who has been published in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in The Nation. And we talked about his book, Owned, How Tech Billionaires on the Right Bought the Loudest Voices on the Left. And in this book, Higgins really goes into the influence of Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Marc Andreessen, David Sachs, on particularly Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, but we also talked about some other folks like a perennial friend of the show, Matthew Iglesias, and I think this was a very interesting conversation that really got to some of the ways that these tech billionaires are shaping the media environment, even with stuff like trad wifery, which I know some listeners have asked about in the past.
Yeah, I thought the conversation was really insightful. And Eoin had some claims about why it is that the tech billionaires care about wokeness, care about like pronouns and even the restrictions that were implemented during the COVID pandemic that I'd never thought about things from that perspective before. So I feel like I'm a little smarter after having this conversation. So hopefully, listeners will come away with the same feeling of edification. So we really enjoyed this.
So I want to just take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. We could not make this show without you. I especially want to thank our newest Patreon supporters, who are Bethany, Lisa, Tom, Ella, Backward Square Leg, Liz, Gigi, Kate, Pour3, I don't know, it's POR3, P0R3, Daniel, Meredith, Extraneous, and Black Cat Pisces. I just thank you so much to everyone who has recently joined. Thank you so much to our long-term supporters. And if you're thinking about becoming a supporter, please go to patreon.com, and our podcast is just Dystopia Now on there. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Without any further ado, here is our interview with Eoin Higgins. Hello, and today we are here with Eoin Higgins. Welcome to the show, Eoin.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So we have been wanting to talk to you for a while because you wrote a book recently that I think covers so much of what we've been talking about on this show. It's called Owned, How Tech Billionaires on the Right Bought the Loudest Voices on the Left. So I was wondering, can we start with just hearing a little bit about, what your book covers for people who may just be hearing about it for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. The book looks at two parallel tracks. It looks at the careers of Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, both of whom are kind of these formerly left-leaning journalists who now have kind of tilted to the right in a lot of ways, as I'm sure we'll get into. And it also looks at the political trajectory of Silicon Valley, specifically right-wing people like Peter Thiel, Marc Andreessen, and the like there. And so it looks at these two guys and this institution and looks at how Silicon Valley has kind of purchased or bought aspects of the alternative media ecosystem, and in doing so has incentivized some independent journalists, to kind of parrot their belief systems and to kind of shift to the right. And then it also, of course, this coincides with the rise of Donald Trump and just the general right-wingification of the specific, I guess, kind of right-wing tilt that we've seen in the U.S. over the past decade or so. The book goes back, to the 90s, and then really talks about like the blogosphere of the early 2000s. But I would say that the meat of the book is really the last 10 or 15 years.
So I thought until I read your writing that what happened to Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald was pretty much just like I think what I sometimes call like boomer brain poisoning. Like it seems like they just kind of got really trapped in their own contrarianism, and especially both of them got like semi-canceled for saying like that, liberals were blowing the Russia stuff out of proportion. And so your writing is really the first time I heard that there's actually been a tech money effort behind that transformation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think all of those are important. Let's start with Russia, right? So after the 2016 election, the explanation that Democrats and many liberals kind of landed on for Hillary Clinton losing to Donald Trump was this must have been a foreign operation by Russia, right? And that was not really plausible, but it didn't really matter because it was an easy explanation. It was an explanation that absolved the Democratic Party essentially of doing it. It also absolved Republicans of being bad. It said, essentially that Trump was an aberration. And there were some kernels of truth to it that Russia may have been involved in some stuff, but it certainly wasn't. Russia wasn't, hacking voting machines. There's been, little to no evidence ever proffered of that has any kind of proof to it. And I would argue that the information that they shared of, how Russia's social media influence campaign worked is sparse at best, let's say. Like the amount of interactions and views that they're saying on Facebook mattered compared to like the amount that normal people get are like the difference is relatively negligible. Anyway, that's kind of like my little soapbox moment. But so because I was also somebody who was challenging this narrative at the time, although of course I didn't have the platform that Matt and Glenn had. And both of them suffered some professional career consequences on this. Basically, they both stopped getting invited onto MSNBC, and to an extent CNN, to the extent that they had been invited on there at all. And Fox and other right-wing media started to kind of present themselves as places for these guys to go, particularly Greenwald, who this is kind of the beginning of his Fox News pivot, which really culminates in 2020, 2021. For Taibbi, he said that the last time that he was allowed on MSNBC was December 2016, at which time he challenged the Russiagate narrative and was never invited back on. His case is interesting, more interesting than Glenn's, and I'll get to why in a second here. But I'll say that for Glenn, he was already somewhat of an irascible presence for liberals on the left, in that like he didn't like the Democratic Party. He never really has. He doesn't like institutions. He's naturally kind of a contrarian guy. And so him going after Russia was not something that I think that Russiagate was not something that people didn't expect. And him criticizing the Democratic reaction to Trump wasn't something that people didn't expect. But for a long time, he was able to have his plausible deniability. The fact that he was also very critical of Trump. Again, this stuff starts to change 2019, 2020, especially 2021. For Taibbi, he went really hard on the Russiagate story in the pages of Rolling Stone. He became kind of persona non grata for liberals who had, up until that point, I think, really seen him as one of their own, kind of their softer version of Hunter S. Thompson, writes for Rolling Stone. Sometimes he uses swear words. It's the kind of same thing. It sounds kind of the same, this writing of his that, at times can seem cringy now. At the time seemed to be kind of cool. He had done a good job of explaining the financial crisis back when that was a thing. So he loses a lot of audience and credibility within the liberal sphere. And then he comes out with this book at the end of 2017 about Eric Garner, I Can't Breathe. And the way that I see it is that this is kind of supposed to like reset his relationship with liberals and the left. And what happens is this drops like right after the Me Too movement really explodes that summer. And his writing that he did while he was at the Exile, this expat magazine in Moscow, that becomes more of a big deal. And honestly, one of the reasons it becomes more of a big deal is because it is being promoted by Mike Cernovich, a notorious right-wing troll who hated Taibbi at the time. But liberals jump on it. There's one person who he harassed through his writing, just to be very clear, she found herself to be harassed through his writing. He wrote some pretty ugly misogynistic stuff about her. I don't want to like downplay it. She wrote an article, I think it was an opinion piece, I think it was for the Washington Post, where she, describes what the what he had said about her and about how, the other stuff that he had written about what they did to women when they were at the exile. They've claimed that this is all satire, and for what it's worth, reporter Walker Bragman that then at Pace Magazine did an investigative kind of deep dive into this stuff, found that like nobody said that there was anything to actual harassment of women at the exiles' offices. Certainly not by Mr. Taibbi, but it didn't. That didn't really matter. The damage was done. A bunch of the tour dates were canceled. And I think that's kind of the beginning of his shift to the right, where he becomes maybe a little bit more open to these arguments. And then, of course, like COVID in 2020 and the election in 2020. And that's kind of when both of these guys go off the rails.
And off the reels, they certainly are. I mean, like, I think I saw Matt Taibbi, like, what was he saying? He was saying something about Barry Weiss the other day, like, which I don't remember exactly what it was, but you saw that, right?
Yeah. He's been kissing up to Barry for a long time. They are kind of aligned in a lot of ways in their politics. This is nothing particularly new as far as that goes, but it is interesting that his response to this has been to kind of, his response to Barry getting this deal has been to really just be shameless with how he's kissing up. But I would argue that like you could see this stuff a lot earlier. I write in the book that in 2023, shortly after the war in Gaza starts, like bombs are dropping, people are being massacred, and there are all of these student protests right on campus. And Matt's, two funny things. Well, not funny, but like October 6th, like the night before it happened, he was on Gutfeld on Fox News, like literally, but it's terrible. But like hours before, he'd been on Gutfeld, and then a couple weeks later, he went on to Newsmax, where he basically said that professors should not be telling their students what to protest about, and that protest is bad, which was the Barry Weiss line at the time. And so I think that if you and then he has accepted awards for being a free speech warrior for his work on the Twitter files, and those speeches have been republished at the Free Press, and there is a relationship there. I wouldn't be surprised if this deal does go through, and if she is given the amount of control that they say that she's going to be given, that we would see some level of Matt coming on in some capacity. I mean, who knows if that'll really happen, but it would be very funny if it did. Also horrible, but it would be also very funny. Yeah.
Do you see his shift as being primarily driven by a change in ideological orientation, or is it just an issue of money? He realized that he's not going to get financially supported by the left anymore, and so therefore, as the term people on social media use is grifter. And so that's why he aligned himself with the right. Or is there some like deeper, more sincere reason why his political views changed?
Yeah, it's a good question. Whatever the case for the initial shift to the right, and I think that it's kind of a combination of ideology and an audience and cash. By 2020, with the anti-vax, anti-trans stuff, he's completely bought in to right-wing ideology, in my view. And I think he's a true believer at this point. I think if you go to his Twitter account, I mean, it's the kind of thing that, if you didn't know this guy was a formerly respected journalist, like you would just think, oh, this is just a run-of-the-mill extreme conspiracy theorist on the right. Honestly, I mean, it really is that. I mean, he's just he's frothing about trans people, primarily the vaccine, Russiagate, and the Twitter files. I mean, and talking about this, like, kind of, to the extent that something like this exists, sure, but like the public-private censorship industrial complex, which he has taken, what I think is real, which is like this kind of interplay between the private sector and the public sector, as far as social media and it goes for speech, and he's just run with it in a direction that is frankly insane. It really is not based in reality. But again, I mean, if you go to his profile, it's just like playing the hits from the last 9 years, and then a couple of like new conspiracy theories. And I really think that he needs to be understood like that. Like Glenn plays the hits too, but his hits are ones that are naturally they can kind of naturally re-slot themselves into what's going on. Glenn is a smarter guy, I think. I mean, I really, like I've said that. Yeah, I've been saying that for a long time. I just think Glenn's smarter, and I think that his ideology and his level of contrarianism is able to adapt itself a lot easier, right? Than Matt's does. So like Glenn was like called himself like one of the godfather of the libs of TikTok account, and like said a lot of horrifically anti-trans stuff, right, in recent memory. He's always been able to pivot off of that and talk about like Chelsea Manning or something like that, and have people like not really hold him accountable for what he's said before. And I'm not arguing that he should be like canceled or something. I'm just saying that like his ideology, his contrarianism is more able to kind of frame what he's doing in a less ugly and bigoted way, no matter what the truth of it is, right? I'm not making a judgment either way to what the truth of it. I'm just saying that he's able to say this stuff in ways. I mean, in the book, when I talked to him, he basically forswore libs of TikTok. He said, like, that's the way I felt then, but I don't feel that way now, and like, what she's doing now is bad, and like then it was good. Like, I don't take that argument particularly seriously, but like it's one that I think he is able to make because he just has this credibility that has been built up. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just trying to like make the distinction here to say that like Glenn's ideology is an ideology of contrarianism and to push back against the establishment, and to always make it seem like he's pushing back against everybody, even though I would argue, and I argue in the book, that he's much more just basically a Republican at this point. But you have to kind of like look under the surface to see that with Glenn. You have to kind of look at what he's saying in context to understand that with Glenn. With Matt, there's no context. There's no subtext. It's all text for him. Like there's no. He's incapable of doing that.
So I guess, what does this all have to do with these tech billionaires? Like, what's the connection there? How have billionaires actually influenced these ideologies?
Sure. So they have put a lot of money into the alternative media ecosystem, and that money has provided people like Glenn and Matt, who already had large platforms. I want to be clear here. Like, they already had large platforms, but it provided them with a way of leveraging their platforms for financial gain. What it's also done is it's provided a template to show other independent media creators the kind of things. I mean, this is all like kind of by implication, but it's very obvious. Like, if you say this kind of stuff, then you get rewarded, right? So Glenn joins Substack. He doesn't take a deal with them. He doesn't get paid by them to do it. He just joins it. But the stuff that he talks about aligns with the interests of these tech guys. Then he gets invited to go to conferences and like gets paid to speak at conferences. And like, I think he did like Balaji Srinivasan's conference and went to, I think what did he say? He went to like the Netherlands or something. Like, they flew him out there, and like, they pay him like that kind of stuff. Like, once you're in that circle. But like, as to why these tech billionaires have done that, it's because, in my view, you go back to the early 2000s, even up until like almost the entire Obama era. The media treatment of tech was very subservient, very sycophantic. They would be like, hey, we're just doing this because we want to save the world. That was basically like just accepted without criticism. I mean, there's a reason that show Silicon Valley like had so much success parodying that, because they were saying that and people were just like buying it hook, line, and sinker. And and what's interesting too is that like I'm like my day job, I'm a tech reporter. I work for Morning Brew's tech newsletter, IT Brew, and people don't really put it that way anymore. They're kind of more open about like this is an industry and we're making money. But at the time, like that's what they were saying, and they were kind of expecting that people would just swallow the line, and for the most part, they did. There were a couple of exceptions. Wired has kind of always been an exception, and kind of most famously, Gawker was an exception, and because they had their Valleywag blog, and this was a Gawker subsidiary, basically that operated within Silicon Valley like it was doing Us Weekly gossip. And in the course of doing that, they made a lot of people angry, but no one did they make as angry as they made Peter Thiel, because they outed him, which I'm certainly not going to defend that, but that's they did. They outed him, and then they also like heavily implied that he was unstable in a lot of ways. They brought up his connection to Ron Paul and like his racist newsletters, and they brought up his far right politics. This all angered Thiel. Arguably, Max Chafkin argues this in his Thiel autobiography, his Thiel biography. This was argued to me by contemporaries of Thiel and other people in Silicon Valley who spoke, obviously, on the condition of anonymity because of how that world works. But they basically all said, "Look, Thiel didn't like being outed, but that was an open secret. But what outing him like this did, like it just added to this perception that Valleywag was pushing forward that Thiel was an unstable person." And that that he found that very insulting. But whatever the case, Thiel had a vendetta against Gawker and ended up destroying Gawker through the Hulk Hogan lawsuit, which I'm sure everyone has at least some passing familiarity with in the audience here. But that's like one of the more extreme examples. Marc Andreessen has a good relationship with the media. Then he goes on Twitter and says, colonialism was good, basically, when India tries to push this law that would kind of curtail Facebook's power a little bit within the country. And then after the election in 2016, there's all of this Russiagate stuff. But what also is there, like people in Congress, especially Democrats, liberals, and like on their mouthpiece MSNBC, right? Like they are talking about how these social media platforms work and how they harm people's brains. And there's a great book called The Chaos Machine by Max Fisher that like really delves into this stuff, but published relatively recently. Like we're going back to like 2016, 2017, and they start to feel very put upon. And they're also like forming an alliance with Trump, because Thiel has all of these guys come and have a meeting with Trump before Trump enters office, and Trump's saying how great they all are, even though he just spent all of this time yelling at them on the campaign trail. So there is this kind of start to be a shift right. But the media aspect of it is that these guys really saw the US media as something that was problematic and broken and needed to be fixed. And when these VCs, these tech guys, the specifically Silicon Valley VC culture, all VCs I think have this to an extent, but this specific Silicon Valley VC thing, which is like move fast, break shit, and just kind of see what happens, right? And in this case, that's what they did. They moved fast. They threw tons of money into all of these different aspects of media, alternative media, right? Like they funded all this different stuff. I mean, like people like Bezos also bought like Washington Post, but up until very recently, he wasn't like that involved. Marc Andreessen puts a lot of money into Substack. Peter Thiel ends up putting a ton of money into Rumble, which is the YouTube clone that pays Glenn Greenwald now to make videos and to write for them. There's Parler, which is like an alternative to Twitter. There's Truth Social. There's and then there is Elon Musk buying Twitter, which is probably like one of the most extreme examples of this. They are trying to take over the information media ecosystem, and I would argue that they have roughly done that at this point. Like they, at least the alternative media ecosystem, I think that the mainstream media ecosystem is undergoing a lot of challenges that have a lot to do with this push as well, but they also have a lot to do with Trump specifically.
I have two quick questions about that. Um, One is, what do you think the underlying impetus? So you're sort of gesturing at an answer to this question. What was the underlying impetus for taking over the media ecosystem? And second, you had mentioned earlier in our conversation the right wingification of Silicon Valley. I'm curious about your views on that. Do you think some of these individuals, like Musk and Andreessen, were always right leaning and they just compromised their ideological commitments in order to align with the systems of power, like during the Obama administration, for example? So, Marc Andreessen has donated to Democratic candidates in the past, I think to Hillary Clinton even. So I'm wondering if you think that Andreessen, sort of like Matt Taibbi, if his ideological worldview has actually changed, or if he maybe was always kind of right wing, and now he just feels free to express that. And does that have something to do with the underlying, like this takeover of the media ecosystem? Do they really believe in this conservative view, and that's why they're trying to, get more and more power within the media arena, or is it just like vengeance or some kind of tribalistic thing, like you were talking about Peter Thiel, just got really angry at Gawker for doing something that frankly was probably not right.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I don't endorse like outing him. I don't think that's like, I think I'll to answer the first question first. I would say that I think that the underlying thing is I think that it really is spite and anger, and I think that if it wasn't in their material interest to do this, they wouldn't do it. So I think that it's in their material interest to control messaging, to push it in the direction of things that make them money, right? So Elon Musk in the White House is kind of like the culmination of this, right? Like spending his time cutting all of these programs that these men in Silicon Valley don't like, and destroying these parts of the government that go to funding things in the third world, and to like destroying parts of the government that are kind of like based in making things easier for people, like and because even like this, like what they're doing is, especially like when it comes to things like USAID, is that like they are cutting this just to cut it, rather than like having any like, and they're not like, it's not like anybody who's cheering this is like, oh good, like no more like US imperial messaging. It's like, I mean, do you think that they're going to stop like bombing people? Like they're not going to stop. Like this is, they're just cutting the thing that they use to pressure people, but at least like there's some like good at some point in it. So but I think that the reason that they do that is because like the reason that like Musk wanted to do that is because I think first of all he doesn't want his money going to African countries that don't have a white population, and I think that also he just doesn't think that money should be spent on that, and money should rather be spent on buying products from Silicon Valley. Because I think the thing that you need to really understand here, and I know you guys do, but is that these guys made their money from government subsidies, from government contracts. I mean, that like they make billions of dollars from the government. So
Musk gets about $8 million a day.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Musk. I mean, Peter Thiel's like Palantir. Like, I mean, like the Andreessen has like all of this crypto interest. David Sachs is in the White House, like determining these. I mean, all of this stuff is pretty obvious for the hypocrisy between their quote unquote right wing libertarian leanings and the reality of how they got their cash. So that kind of brings me to the ideological thing. Like, do I think that they always believe it? I think it depends on who you're talking about. Now, Peter Thiel has been right wing for forever. Like, he grew up that way. He back in the 90s when he was at Stanford, he made his own Stanford newspaper because he felt that the media at Stanford was not like right wing enough or that it was too liberal, right? I think I have a quote in the book where I was talking to one of his contemporaries at Stanford who was like, "Yeah, this is not like a Maoist like campus. This was like very light liberal. You know, a lot of these guys go on to have like third way politics. You know, like this is not like a hotbed of radical sentiment, right?" And then, you know, the other aspect of it is that Thiel, I think, has just kind of always felt like the world is too liberal and that he is fighting for, or not the world, but like the world that he kind of exists in is too liberal, if that makes sense. Like he's always felt that way, that he's surrounded by liberals wherever he goes, and that's not something that's a good fit. Andreessen, his political, he became openly right wing after the India comments and after the pushback from that. I think that he was probably always like small c conservative, but he certainly went to the government to get them to break up Microsoft when Microsoft basically killed Netscape Navigator, which is the browser that he helped to create when he went to the private sector after he built a browser at the college that he went to, which was very successful, but then he wasn't able to have any control over it. So then he went to Silicon Valley where he made the commercial browser. I think that he started to become red pill. I wrote an article about this back in 2018 for the Outline, just talking about like looking at his likes back when you could still look at that stuff. If only we could look at that stuff now. And
it was
just
back
kind of
for like a day. Like,
was it?
Yeah,
Oh,
it came
man,
back
I
for
wish
like
I'd
a
known.
day, and then they took it away again.
Oh man, I wish I'd
When
known. I
was that?
would've.
Not that long ago. I'll find it and
Ah.
I'll put it in the show
Yeah.
notes. But
I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Man. That's kind of like his politics, I think, have kind of gone to the right, and then they've gone very, very far to the right. You know, like especially in the last like 5 years, because COVID again was a really like radicalizing moment for these guys. And again, like it's not because in my view, the reason that COVID was a radicalizing moment for these guys is because the government was paying people not to work when they wanted people to work for them, and that their taxes were possibly going to this, and that they also, and they were just like mad that like that the government was like telling them about their money. You know, like Musk specifically fought against California to get them to kind of give him like an exception to the shutdown or something, to like the workers shutdown, so that he could have people work in his plants. And I think that a lot of it included like COVID safety measures, which of course he hated because that's extra money that he has to spend. He really believes that like if you do this kind of extremely hardcore way of taking care of business, that everything's going to work. Like it's you know, I don't agree with it. I think it's dumb, but you know, like I'm just one person. I obviously don't have the billions of dollars that he has, so what do I know? But I think that, you know, he's always all about like stripping things down and trying to make as much money as possible, as we've seen with Twitter. But as far as like Musk's politics before that, you know, I would say much like Andreessen, he was quiet about them, but he has talked about like waiting in line to talk to Obama. Like back in the day, he's talked about how much like he admired him, and you know, he considered himself to be a liberal until it was too late, and you know, then like the liberals lost him. Like he didn't want to leave, but you know, they lost him on all of the kooky trans and COVID stuff, and turning into communists with Bernie, you know. So I mean, it's just like it's the usual. We don't have to take any of this stuff seriously, but like that is what he said. However, like his ex-wife did say, there's an interesting little anecdote that they were having their first dance at their wedding, and he like leans down over her and whispers in her ear, "I am the alpha in this relationship," which is just like a very weird thing to say. Like,
I mean, we all know
first of all, you
that
have to
an
say
alpha
it. If you
has
have
to
to say it,
say that they are
Yeah,
the alpha. That's
yeah.
how you know,
Yeah.
is that the person announces it. Yeah.
I mean, it just like sums up like his insecurity and like, you know, just what a like small little person he is.
It's so goofy.
Yeah, but I find it hard to believe that he didn't have right wing politics before. I mean, him and Thiel were behind. Like, I mean, they basically created PayPal. He
Yeah.
worked right next to Thiel. There's a story about him and Thiel in a sports car. Musk is driving it super fast. They crash. They flip it like 5 times or something like that. They both walk away somehow, and Musk is like, yeah, it's not insured. And Thiel's like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on here? I think that kind of sums up really well, like, both of their personalities, at least what we know of them publicly. Musk is this kind of bravado idiot, and Thiel is kind of like a smarter, maybe more measured personality. Although, I mean, I don't know. The stuff that Thiel is saying right now about the Antichrist, it makes it very difficult to think that he is operating with a full deck at this point. But but who knows? I mean, I think that either way, these guys all, to a varying extent, I think, had right wing. David Sachs, sorry, I just want to say, David Sachs, who's in the White House, running crypto now, was also part of the so-called PayPal mafia. But he's known Thiel since college. That Stanford Review, the right wing student newspaper. They both worked on it, and then they worked on this book that they called The Diversity Myth in the 90s. That they were supposed to be the big new thing in conservative commentary. But as again, to reference Chafkin, I mean, he points out, and I think this is very smart. His book, maybe if the book had come out a year or two earlier, it would have hit that anti-politically correct thing. But by the time it came out, everybody agreed with it. You had already won that argument. Everyone's already saying politically correct is stupid. So now, now you're in a situation where, yeah, you get a couple of columns at the Wall Street Journal, and you get some recognition in right wing spaces. I mean, to be clear, the book is insanely racist. So, of course, there's going to be a market for that within the right wing, but it just isn't quite hitting in the same way. But that's just a long way of saying Sachs has been like this for a long time too. And so I think that these guys are all to one extent or another have been conservative, but maybe small c conservative for Andreessen and Musk, who really, I think, didn't really care about this stuff too much until they got radicalized.
I have noticed something that I've been wondering about for a little while. I totally understand why these dudes are what people would call economically conservative. Obviously they want to pay no taxes, and obviously they want wars because a lot of them have defense contracts and stuff. I guess the part that hasn't made sense to me as much is how much they've pushed this kind of trad gender role stuff, and they're also very anti-trans. There's a lot of what people call social conservatism. There's the weird pronatalism where they're obsessed with the birth rate, and some shit men being alpha or whatever. It's all really stupid. And I guess when I'm thinking about myself, and I'm yeah, if I had millions and millions or billions of dollars, I just wouldn't give a fuck what anyone was doing, let alone in their very personal life. But why are they so into this weird kind of social conservatism stuff? And also how much are these billionaires driving it? For example, the trad wife trend that is really huge on TikTok. How much are these guys actually responsible for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. And I've been looking into it for a couple of projects that I'm working on. I think that it's kind of confusing to understand why all this stuff is happening. An easy answer would be to say that they've been radicalized by their own platforms, right? That the social media platforms that they own / are huge investors in have kind of radicalized them to the extent that now they believe this stuff as well. I think to a certain extent that's probably true. I also think that Musk in the early around 2000 said, "I'm the alpha in this relationship." People who are successful in industry, whatever the industry, don't tend to be libertine free thinkers. in general. And by the way, I'm not saying that pejoratively. I'm just saying like that's just tends to be like the way that it is. Like you're more concerned with making money and products, and I'm not even saying that there's anything particularly wrong with that. I think that if that's the way you are, that's the way you are. Like that's fine. Like if you want to have like a white picket fence and 3 kids and a dog, or like whatever. Like it does. I mean, obviously these guys are like very rich, and so they have a moat and stuff like that. But it's all like the same kind of thing. Like like you're trying, but you're just you want this kind of more traditional family structure, and if that works for you and your partner, like go for it. Like that's great. But I think there is this kind of undercurrent of misogyny and this undercurrent of traditionalist gender roles that have kind of naturally put us where we are now. A lot of that is driven by this reflexive anti like Western medicine kind of feeling that these guys have. There's a reason that they were all so into RFK, right? Like and Maha, like because I think they do kind of. They are, for everything that we're saying, like they are in California, right? Like that is like that they are there, and like they that stuff. There's a reason that kind of new agey, granola-y, make America healthy again stuff like exists there. Like there's a reason that it exists there, and there's a lot of fertile ground for it. So it is an interesting style of social conservatism. Some of these guys like occasionally will like flirt with Christianity, but they never really go all in, and I think it's because they don't really believe it.
Except
particularly,
I don't know. Do you think Thiel does? It seems to me
No.
like he. Okay,
No, I think he's
the Antichrist. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that because it's interesting because he said something about Christianity last year, that is like the founder of like wokeism because it's all about being a victim, and like that's what to him like he's like that's what Christianity is. It's being woke. It's like the woke religion, and so therefore like that's why I don't like Christianity. Okay, yeah, it's like okay, like hey, look, with his identity. There, like I do understand why he might not like Christianity. I don't think that's actually like one of the reasons that he has for it, but like, I understand that, but and I'm certainly not going to defend religion in any way. But I just think that these guys are just weird, honestly.
Yeah.
Really, like these guys are just weird. Like they are just kind of like weird dudes, and they have weird ideas. And I think that this is one of them. And I really do think that it's important to put this also in the context of like RFK and the social conservatism around it's hard for me to like kind of like divorce like the social conservative around like gender with like people who have gendered identities that require the barest minimum of respect and consideration by other people in the workplace to be like one of the reasons that these guys hate it. Because anything that happens in the workplace that they can't control is a sign of worker power, and so they have to like destroy it. They have to kill it. And so I think that is like part of the reason. Like they hate it. They're like why should we like respect your pronouns? It has nothing. It's not that, but I think it has almost like as much to do with not wanting people at work to be asserting themselves as it does with like their actual social conservatism, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
That does make sense. I've not thought about it that way before. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I think I am a vulgar materialist, so like for me, like when I'm looking at any of this stuff, like I always like look at like, okay, like what's the most like bottom line financial reason they would have to do this, and that's what it comes down to. Like if you let your workers say, hey, you have to refer to me as with a pronoun that might not be the automatic one that you think of when you look at me, or that like, or if I'm transitioning and like like you've known me as like she, and now I want you to refer to me as he, like it strikes me that obviously there is like the social conservatism aspect of it, but it's also like I don't want to have to do that. Like, I don't want to have to tell people at work that they have to like respect what you're asking them to do, because that's a slippery slope. Um, and I think that with a lot of like the COVID stuff, 1000%, I think the anti-vax stuff is based on that. Like it's not so much that these guys start. I mean, I think at this point they're all crazy, but like at the time, I don't think they started being like the vaccine is fake, like shutdowns are fake, like none of this stuff works. It's like they were like, I don't like this because this is slowing down my production and might like hurt my bottom line this year. And then the Great Barrington Declaration. By the way, I grew up right next to Great Barrington. I just want to say
it's a
that
beautiful
declaration.
area. Yeah.
It is a beautiful area, and that declaration is not representative of the area. But I just want to say that
It's full of NPR libs every time I've been there. Yeah.
it is full of NPR libs, and unfortunately, not a small amount of anti-vaxxers, but there's like a lot of Waldorf schools there. Anyway, but like once that came out, like they were like, oh, see, look, yes, of course this stuff doesn't work. We told you it didn't work. Let's all get back to work. And I think that it has to be kind of understood in that way that they were just like looking for a reason.
I have one more figure that I want to ask about. I know we are wrapping up here in just a second, but like, your book focuses a lot on Greenwald and Taibbi, but somebody that I've always thought seems to be on the take from tech, especially Andreessen, one or the other. Like, I don't know, but it just seems that way to me, is Matthew Iglesias. Like, that guy just parrots a lot of Andreessen's ideas, and then I saw them do a fundraiser together, and I'm like, what is the relationship here? Is there any financial relationship?
I mean, Iglesias got a lot of money from Substack to come over there from Fox after Andreessen invested. So, who knows? I think that Andreessen probably likes a lot of what Iglesias has to say. Iglesias also doesn't believe in anything. So, what he has to say may change whenever he wants it to. But I think Iglesias, and I have to admit here that while I find him risible and I find his Twitter presence to be really repellent, and everything I've read by him, I've thought was bad. Having said all of that, though, like I don't really interact with him or follow his stuff at all, and I never really have.
Good
I don't
choice.
find him particularly interesting. So I want to preface that by saying that I haven't really like followed him like too closely. But I believe that he was like outed for being in a group chat with Andreessen or like in one of those group chats. If I'm wrong about that, don't sue me, Matt. But I believe he was, and like I don't think that it's I don't think that it's like out of the bounds of like plausibility to say that he does parrot a lot of things that Andreessen wants to hear, especially what Andreessen would want to hear from a nominal liberal. Matt was like well read in the Biden White House, which I think says a lot for its direction in the last 2 years of that administration. So I think that you just have to kind of understand him in that context, and so it's not implausible to me that like they would be buddies and that he would be parroting a lot of what Andreessen said. I think that when it comes to like being on the take, I mean, this is like the same thing with Greenwald and Taibbi. It's like you can't necessarily draw a straight line. You can just kind of show like the benefits and like the money that these guys and the opportunities that they're getting and like how their messages like will align with the people who are giving them the opportunity. This is not exclusive to them or to tech or to the right wing. Right, this happens in a lot of different ways, but I think that it just needs to be understood this way. And I think that for someone like Iglesias, it's not surprising that the message that he's sending would align with the message that Marc Andreessen is trying to put forward, because Matt tends to, from what I can tell, just kind of like tailor whatever his message is to whoever's in power. And people like Marc Andreessen are always going to be in power because they have a lot of money. So, yeah.
Well, this has been such an interesting conversation. Where can our listeners find your work?
You can find me on Twitter and on Blue Sky, just first name, last name, underscore on Twitter, no underscore on Blue Sky, and just check out my book. And yeah, I mean, my writing pops up here and there. So yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
thanks so much, guys. Thank you.